I'm trying something a little different today. I'm sorry. My sermon notes, as you're going to know, you've probably already seen, have blanks in them. So we're trying something new. I've done this once or twice before. Somebody brought it to my attention. It sounded like a really good idea, so we're going to give it a shot. Any feedback that you have, I would be most interested to hear any kind of feedback that you've got from this, so I can adjust accordingly. So as this is new for Scotty, this is new for me, this is new for her, we are all in the same boat together here today. So don't want anybody getting too comfortable. Children are a blessing from the Lord. Children are a blessing from the Lord. Children are a blessing from the Lord. Sherry and I say this to ourselves over and over again. When the children are being trying and they're not behaving, children are a blessing from the Lord. And indeed, children are a blessing from the Lord. That's one of those sayings that we say. Some days are better than others. You got that right. It's one of those sayings that kind of sort of come from Scripture, but that saying has kind of been altered a little bit. It's actually from Psalm 127:3. But children are indeed a blessing from the Lord. And today we're going to continue on in Ephesians, draw upon the well, this time for our families. Last week was for our marriage. This week we're going to tackle the problem of children and our families this week. If you would read along with me, it's a really short passage. Chapter 6, verse 1. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, because this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment, with a promise, that it may go well with you, and that you may have a long life in the land. And fathers, don't stir up anger in your children, but bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. The first issue that Paul addresses here is Paul addresses the submissive party first. That's that first blank right there. It's the submissive party. Like last week when we talked about husbands and wives, and Paul addresses the wives first last week, this week we address the children first. Because in this relationship, the children are the submissive party to the parents. And might I add, as any parent knows, that when the children run things, that makes for very much chaos. It's Paul calls the children, and he says children are to obey their parents. Children are to obey their parents. He says, because this is right. I know you are still learning this. See, it's a walk. We walk together in this. Okay? Children are to obey their parents. But the question comes, what if the parents are not Christian? See, we addressed that last week. What if the wife is a Christian and the husband is not? Well, we kind of discussed last week that the wife has a duty to obey the Lord over her husband. Okay? But this week, it's kind of a different kind of thing. While the children, if they are a Christian, if they are faithful, have a duty to obey the Lord, they also have a duty to obey their parents in everything. Okay? Now obeying is one of those words. It's kind of loaded down. Okay? Obey, it just, God calls us to obey, and it's not out of do this because I said so, but we're called to obey because it really is in our best interest. And when a parent, as any parent knows, when we call our children to obey, we really have their best interest in mind. Okay? Verses 2 and 3 continue on. He says, honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment, with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may have a long life in the land. That is taken from two scriptures. Okay? That's taken from Exodus 20, verse 6, And it's also taken from Deuteronomy 5:16. How many people knew that the Ten Commandments were in two different places? Did you guys know that?
No.
That's the Ten Commandments. Exodus 26, and chapter 20, and then Deuteronomy chapter 5. And in those, pardon me, and in those commandments, Paul says this is the first commandment with a promise. Well, in actuality, he's not wrong in that. It's just we have to understand what he's saying. There are little tails to some of these commandments, and the fifth commandment to honor your father and mother, we kind of cut that short off at the end. But what he says there, he says that it may go well with you and that you may have long life in the land. That's part of the commandment of honoring your mother and father. It's a promise. It's a promise that honoring your father and mother it comes with a promise of long life in the land. Now, that promise there, that promise reflects discipline. That's our next blank there. The promise reflects discipline. Because the problem is, if the children don't learn to obey their parents, they will have difficulty living a disciplined life. And might I add that in today's world, the disciplined life kind of is a thing of the past. It's people having, even my generation, I have trouble with this, very, very much so, with the idea of discipline. And it's what he's saying here, and as a result, undisciplined people tend not to live as long. He's not telling you that he's going to strike you down dead, but what he's saying is that people who are undisciplined have a tendency to not live quite as long. Food. If you are undisciplined with food, you are going to eat stuff that's not very good for you, and you're going to have health problems because of it. If you are undisciplined as far as following the rules of the road, if you're undisciplined as far as following the instructions of the doctor, if you are undisciplined as far as following the instructions of your parents, Mama knows best, right? Mama knows best. Mama always knows best. Yeah, Mama always knows best. How many times did I just not obey Mama? And I paid the consequences for it. Oh yeah. My mom's got a lot of stories. It's too bad she's not here because she'd be tattling a story on me right now. There was one time that I went down. We lived out of I lived in the town of East Peoria, and downtown was probably probably 5 miles away or so, and we lived back off in this little subdivision way back, and there was a main road that ran down. It's 150. It's like 183 right out here. You can hop down 183 and go up to Ceiling. Well, we went down on the last day of school, and we rode down 150 on our bikes down to school, this 5-mile stretch. My mom wanted to kill me. I mean, because she's like, you could have been killed. Because 150 is notorious for being a very dangerous road. There's no shoulders on the side of the road. There's no guardrails. There's no sidewalks. There's nothing there. We rode our bikes all the way down this road, and I got back and Mom lit into me something awful. I said, at least I never did it again. But the idea is that we need to be disciplined, and the idea, speaking to the children in the room today, is that you need to live a life that is obedient to your parents, because your parents really do have your best interest in mind. They really do. Verse 4 says, "And fathers, don't stir up anger in your children, but bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord." Fathers are addressed here first, only because they are the head of the family. This is kind of a general kind of statement to parents in general. This is about parental responsibility, and it's applicable to both parents. This isn't just something where he says, fathers, this is just your responsibility and it's done and over with. Dad's designed to be the heavy in the family and that's it. Well, no, that's not quite what he's saying. He's addressing fathers because the father is the head of the family, if we remember from last week. The father is the one responsible to answering for the Lord, so to the Lord for our families. So he goes back and he addresses the fathers, and we are to help this implement this in our families. And he says, do not stir up anger. The word that is there in there for anger is the word exasperate. Is what the Greek word means, and that word exasperate means to aggravate and to irritate. We kind of think of anger as this kind of explosive outward, kind of thing, but I like the word exasperate better because the word exasperate kind of carries with it some other stuff. And it carries with it that idea of just aggravation and irritation and for lack of a better word, nagging. You just kind of, it has that nagging quality about it. And that's what he's saying. He's like, fathers, do not stir up anger. Do not exasperate your children. Do not irritate them. Do not aggravate them. But bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. You see, parents are not to show favoritism. Parents are not to make unreasonable demands. Parents are not to make petty rules or be discouraging. See, we have responsibilities as parents to not show favoritism, because showing favoritism to one child over the other is going to make the other child feel neglected. They're going to feel like they're not loved. They're going to feel like that they just can't do anything to please mom or dad. They just don't feel like they measure up. That favoritism is very dangerous. Parents are not to make unreasonable demands. The rules you set over your household, are you nitpicking? My wife, she tells me all the time, she's like, Ryan, pick your battles. Yeah. And that's one of those moments where the husband submits back to the wife and the advice that she's giving. You're right. You need to pick your battles, because there are just some things that are unreasonable demands. They're petty rules. They're in the grand scheme of things, they're just not vital. Okay? And don't be discouraging, because when you discourage your children, they kind of grow up through life, and it's the favoritism thing. They just don't feel like they're worth anything. They have self-esteem problems and things like that. Encourage your children. That isn't to say that we're not to discipline them. That is not what that means. But what that does mean is instead we need to train them up in the instruction of the Lord. That is directly from Proverbs 22:6. And this youth group that Sherry's going to kick off on Wednesday night, that is the kind of motto of this youth group, is Proverbs 22:6. Fathers and mothers and parents, train your children up in the instruction of the Lord, so that way when they grow old, they will not depart from it. Hence the reason we're calling it 90 degrees, because a 90-degree angle stands up straight, meaning we raise up our children in the Lord. That's the idea behind this. We need to raise our children up in the instruction of the Lord, so that way when they grow old, they do not depart from it, and they become productive members of a congregation and of a society. We need to provide instruction, realizing that children aren't always going to be happy with the discipline that we give them. But we need to teach them the ways of the Lord, that when they grow old, they will not depart from it. Children are not always going to be happy with the discipline you provide. because I know that when God disciplines, I'm not exactly always happy with it either. But it really is for our best interest. It really is for the good of our walk with Him. Verse 4, and fathers, don't stir up anger in your children, but bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. You see, there's a priority here. You see, we addressed children here today. Last week, we addressed wives and husbands. Not next week, because next week is a fifth Sunday, so we've got a guest speaker next week. But the week after, the next time we come back, we're going to be talking about the next step in the process, and that's work. But the priority here is the idea is that the Spirit-controlled life has a priority to it. And that priority here is lined out straight through this book, right here. The first one is God. God has the first step. He is the precedence by which we submit first. He is the top priority. The second one is marriage. Marriage takes a notch right under God. After that, children have the notch. Verses chapter 6, 1-4. And the one under that is work. The problem is that we get these priorities all whack. How many people know somebody where the parents focus all on the kids? How many people know somebody who divorced after their kids are grown? Happens a lot. How many people know anybody who are empty nesters who aren't close in their marriage at all, but yet they remain married anyway? These are all situations that are where the priorities are out of whack. You see, when a marriage is completely focused on the kids, when the marriage is focused all on the kids, the priorities are out of whack. And therefore, when the kids grow up and there's no kids in the house, what took precedence is not there anymore. And what happens is the parents divorce after the kids are gone. I have seen it time and time again. My parents didn't quite make it that far. I was 16 when my parents divorced. My parents didn't focus all on us. My parents kind of, sort of, they had a great marriage. They really did. But a lot of my friends' families, after we graduated high school, the parents divorced. Because part of the problem is the priorities are out of whack. It's why, there are marriages there that where they're still married, but they're not as close as they should be, because they haven't taken the proper time to focus on the marriage. That's why last week's sermon was so important. It is because we have got to work on our marriages. We've got to build our marriages up strong, so that way we can be a rock for our children. That's what makes solid families, is having a solid marriage. And that's what helps kids grow up into productive members of a congregation, productive members of society, is kids seeing that modeled, that godly marriage modeled in a home, and they know how everything works. The problem is that families don't pray, they don't read, they don't study, and they don't discuss faith together. The problem is that we don't focus on the things that we should be focusing on. And I'm going to knock sports here, but don't hear me wrong, because I love sports. There is a time and a place for sporting events. But we have a tendency to be completely sports focused in today's culture. I mean, like, way focused. overly focused on sports. Sports are good. They're awesome, and they need to happen. But the priority doesn't need to be there. We need to have a priority on God first. We need to have a priority on our marriage. And let me throw something else out there that I forgot to mention last week as far as a marriage is concerned. If you and your spouse are not taking a date night at the minimum of once a month, start. Do it. Because your marriage needs that attention. It needs to have that. You need it. And by date night, I don't necessarily mean going out to eat to a restaurant and going to a movie or going shopping or what. You don't, for a date night, you don't have to do a darn thing. That means setting aside 2 or 3 hours with your spouse. It doesn't matter what you do. It's being together. It's talking. It's discussing how life is. How are you? How are you doing with the kids? Are you coping with life okay? It's building that relationship with your spouse. And when we build that relationship with our spouse, we're going to come and in our family we don't we pray together and we don't read and study a lot together, but we do a lot of faith discussing and a lot of praying in our family. We need to read and study more. But discussing faith and faith issues, it is very, very important to model for our kids so that they have a good foundation to build upon. When we don't pray and read and study and discuss, I'm not saying we have to do all 4 of these, but when we have this foundation here, or when we don't have the foundation here, when we don't have the foundation there, it's why kids leave the church after they grow up. We have kids leaving in droves out of the church when they get to college. Because number one, because faith, there are professors out there that are atheists and they rip their faith inside out. But it's also because they don't have the proper foundation either. Okay. And that leads me to this last little thing right down here. If we want to change the world, it starts at home. Now, we can take that and apply that to families, but we can also apply that individually too. If we want to see change in the world, that applies to me first. And that includes taking a look at your life and looking inward upon yourself. One of the things that my mentor told me is he said that you have to take a step back and take an unbiased look at yourself. It's part of the problem. You have to be able to evaluate things. And as husbands and fathers, we really have to be able to do that. Because if we don't, we're going to end up showing favoritism to our kids. Or we're going to have issues with any of these other, favoritism or petty rules and stuff like that. We're going to have issues with that. The big idea for today is Christ is our example when building our family. Sorry, that was a big one. But Christ is our example when it comes to marriage. And it absolutely has to, it absolutely has to be there. There is a priority to life: God, marriage, family. And next week we'll take a look at work. But that's another area where we kind of get the apple cart upset, is where we put work ahead of everything else. We try to make a living before our family. We get so caught up in making a living for our family. We'll say it like that. We get so caught up in making a living for our family that we forget that our family needs us more than what it means to have that income. I mean, income's important. But there's no substitute for you and your family. You are very important and very vital to your family, and your family needs you. My friends, whatever it is that you need today, I want to encourage you to stand up. I want you to give your life to the Lord. I want you to be renewed in Him, rededicate yourself, whatever the case may be. You know, maybe you got your priorities all out of whack, and this has kind of been like one of those, whoa, you know, maybe that's why I'm having issues. You know, maybe it's one of those kind of deals, or, you know, maybe it's the realization that your faith isn't as strong as you thought it was. Rosa talked about that. It's amazing how things come together like that. You know, faith is huge, and Hebrews does talk a lot about it. So if you would stand and sing with me a hymn of invitation, love lifted me.